they're moved to change their comparison points too. The rich are moved to think about eternity. What is it that Troy emphasized about what happens when we come into this world and when we go out of this world? What's our situation? We're naked. We're naked coming in, and in terms of what we can take with us, we're naked going out. That's what the rich realize, that everything that may have caused them to regard themselves, perhaps even as better than others when they were outside of Christ, to realize those things don't matter. They're temporary. They're a reality that is really just smoke. It's gonna fade away. That what really matters are the eternal things. And it's those who humble themselves before God that have those things. So in changing their comparison points, they humble themselves instead of being proud in what they have. You and I must decide what will motivate us. At the end of 2 Corinthians 4, Paul lists a whole bunch of things that he suffered as a Christian in that latter half of the chapter. And the question he can imagine people asking is, why would you endure all that and keep on teaching, considering what you're teaching has cost you? And Paul says, as the psalmist said, we believe, therefore we speak. And then Paul talks about the comparisons he's thinking about when he makes his decisions from day to day, there at the end of 2 Corinthians 4. He says the outward man is perishing. The inward man is being renewed day by day, because what was he focusing on? When he's thinking about his trials, his persecutions, what does he compare them to? Yeah, Mark says Paul calls them, it's horrible persecution he's endured, but he calls them light afflictions, which are but for a moment. They are light compared to what? The blessings of eternity. They are but for a moment compared to what? Yeah, the enduring nature of eternity. That choosing the right comparison points, choosing what will motivate us, will it be the temporal or will it be the eternal? Will it be the physical or will it be the spiritual? Makes all the difference in the way we view and manage so many things in life, including our finances. Frank. Suffer. Yes. Yeah. He chose to suffer reproach for Christ rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, I think is how it goes. Yeah. He realized that the best he had in Pharaoh's house wasn't going to last very long. But that God was giving him the opportunity to make some decisions that would result in eternal well-being and blessings. It makes all the difference, these decisions that we each need to make. Was there another comment? I thought I saw someone else's hand. Maybe you were just throwing up your arms. I think this lesson really gets to the nitty-gritty of who and what we each are. In Hebrews chapter 11, talking about the patriarchs, or in 1 Peter 2, talking about the way we're to view ourselves as we live in this world, What were some of the terminology that was used? The patriarchs, what were they in this world? They were strangers and pilgrims. Peter says that we, as strangers or aliens, foreigners in a foreign culture, remember our citizenship is in heaven. We as foreigners, aliens, and pilgrims, if that's what we are, then we are in this world to influence it. But if we're letting ourselves be conformed to the culture in which we live, particularly in regards to this message, this lesson, if the decisions we're making regarding money are more guided by what we see on television, and I read a statistic just the other day that there's this direct correlation. The more television people watch, the higher their debt to income ratio will be. If we are letting what we see on TV, what our coworkers are doing, what we see our neighbors doing, if we're letting those things influence us, are we pilgrims and strangers in this world? No, we're worldly. We may not be immoral, but we're worldly, and we have succumbed to our culture, and therefore instead of influencing it, we've allowed ourselves to be influenced by it. In other words, instead of being just in this world, we are now of this world. The very thing Jesus prayed would not occur in his prayer in John 17. Any thoughts or comments about that? Yes, Mark. Yes. Yesterday, we combined two celebrations. My mother's 81st birthday that we had not celebrated yet, and my parents' 62nd wedding anniversary. And I was talking to a relative that I'll call young because he's in his mid-30s. And he's a brother, and he was talking about the people he works with. He has a rather high position in an international company, a good income. But he said, the people I work with, they have chosen mates who can make a high salary like theirs. They're both working. So it's really strange to them that my wife and I, we began planning in our early 20s so that we would not have to have two incomes to live. We began setting benchmarks for ourselves that we're going to do this, and when we get to that point, we're going to stop living on her salary. She'll keep working, but it'll all be used for saving and giving. And then when we get to another point in my career advancement, we're going to start decreasing the hours she works. And by the time we have children, she's going to be home and we're going to be living on my salary, whatever it is. But he said, that's just weird. That's just weird to the people I work with. When they think about buying a house, or those that right now are building a house, it's going to be between $800,000 and $1 million. They think it's very strange that we don't want to spend half that on a house. We've got to lead instead of follow. We've got to be willing to look strange to the people in the world if we want to influence the world. Yes, Hugh.
That if you come to church and donate to the church and give your means, that you will deserve to live well. Because you're a Christian, you'll deserve to get and have and continue to live fine because you're donating to the church.
The very thing that Paul denounced in 1 Corinthians 6, he denounced those who thought godliness was a source of gain. And of course, it flies in the face of folks like Paul, who sacrificed, who counted it all loss for Christ. It flies in the face of the example of Christ himself, who became poor in order to enable others to be blessed for eternity. Troy's assigned topic was, I'm not ashamed to live within my means. But does anyone remember he just took us through a series of questions, starting with what are means, and then what are my means, and he just kept asking questions until, does anyone remember the question that he was eventually led to ask us, am I willing to live blank my means? Yeah, am I willing to live below or beneath my means? And I'd like to say that as much as I appreciate this whole series the elders have planned and am impressed with their planning, I'm so glad that Raymond Costello changed his title to I'm not ashamed to be biblically correct rather than politically correct. And I'm glad that Troy led us to realize that where the rubber meets the road for Christians is not simply our living within our means, but our living below our means. The Bible is full of all these contrasts between the righteous and the wicked. Do some research about them. Ephesians 4, about verse 28, I think. Paul says to Christians, let those who stole steal no more, but work. Why? Yeah, so that they'll have to share with those that need. The wicked may steal. We're not righteous simply by not stealing. The righteous approach their finances in ways that allow them to share with others. The book of Psalms tells us, it's in that same context in which David observed that he had not seen the righteous forsaken. And he draws this contrast that the wicked fail to repay their debts, but the righteous lend to the poor. Our holiness has got to go beyond our just not doing the bad stuff. Being righteous means that we live beneath our means that we might do good. Why should we be living below our means? What is it that we need to be doing that requires that? I think there's more than one way to answer that question, by the way. Why do we need to be living below our means? I have no idea because that wasn't in my notes. No, yes.
When we live within or even above our means, we can lose perspective on our soul salvation. And that is the main point beyond anything else. You can say that I live below my means because I'm saving for this, or because I want this paid off, or I want out of debt. But if at the end of the day, you lay your head down at night and you don't have your soul focused on the Lord, it doesn't matter. That's why in Luke 12:20, he says, thou fool, tonight your soul is required of you. It wasn't necessarily that he was tearing down bigger barns. He had no thought for where his soul would be. And if at the end of the day we've let our comfort of living within our means, we may have everything paid off, but have no thought towards what spiritually we're going to do, we've missed it.
I appreciate you making that point so much. Just getting your finances in order is not going to assure you a home in heaven. It's absolutely the case. Another comment? Yes. Why should we be living below our means? What is that to enable? I think, Cindy, was what I added.
That if we live below our means, it allows us to take advantage of opportunities that are presented that we can serve, and it allows for contingencies, emergencies. It is a safety. It's a safety.
Yes.
Lowers our stress.
It lowers our stress. Absolutely. My daughter-in-law, on the way to the family reunion, was reading Dickens, and it slips my mind now. We need a teacher to tell us. David Copperfield. And in it, he observes that the person that earns 20 pounds but lives on 19 pounds, whatever, will be happy. The person that earns 20 pounds but lives on 20 and a half will be miserable. And there's so much truth to that. The Bible doesn't say a lot about saving, in my judgment, and it does approach it with a mixed kind of perspectives on which to view it. Of course, it's wrong to be miserly. It's wrong to hoard wealth, just to hoard wealth. But passages like Proverbs 21:20, the house of the wise are stores of choice food and oil, but a foolish man devours all he has, ought to encourage us to save. What little creature does Proverbs 6:6-8 urge us to consider? The ant, yes, the ant. Consider his ways and be wise. He stores up provisions in summer. He saves for the future. When you have more than you need to be thinking about the time when you may have less than you need. And while we ought to be humble and be willing to receive help from our brothers and sisters, the New Testament emphasizes our working and managing our money in ways that will allow us to take care of ourselves and our own. That's important too. We need to live below our means so we can save. And yes, Lee. Well, I was about to go to another thought, so.
Is retirement a recent Western civilization concept?
Well, I think some aspects of it are, but it just wasn't pensions and IRAs that people thought about in the past. They did think about building their estate so that they would have enough to live on, and maybe even some to bequeath their children, if wise. So in that sense, I think there's always been interest in retirement. I don't know what you were getting at, but certainly, one can be praised for his financial responsibility and forethought, and yet be regarded by the Lord as worldly because of his approach to that. We we can, well, we're not going to get to it maybe, but down at 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19, who are and what are we to trust? God. What are we not to trust, Paul says, verse 17. We're not to trust in uncertain riches. But when we are saving these huge amounts so that we'll have X million dollars in retirement, when we are spending huge amounts on every kind of insurance we can imagine in the name of being financially responsible, we need to back up and look at that and really think about, are we trusting in uncertain riches? Or is our trust in God? Our trust needs to be in God, which is going to include being financially responsible, but it's going to temper what many people are doing and recommending today. Who's the financial guru of our times? Dave Ramsey, of course. When Cindy and I were in our 20s and early 30s and really thinking about these things, one of us a little more than the other perhaps, the gurus were Larry Burkett and Ron Blue and some others, especially Larry Burkett. Many of the same things Dave Ramsey teaches, he taught. I believe he's deceased now, as I remember. But he was so much more spiritual in his approach than Dave Ramsey is. There are many things Dave Ramsey recommends in terms of how much you're to be saving and how much insurance you should have that I really think we need to take with a grain of inspired salt and really ask ourselves, is that serving self or is that honoring God with our finances? What does Matthew 6 verse 19, how does that verse begin? Lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth. We need to live below our means so that we can save. But should we be selfish? Should our motive be laying up for ourselves treasures on earth? There's good reasons to save, lots of good reasons. It may be that the majority of us in this room perhaps are not saving enough, but it's possible that some of us are saving too much. We need to live below our means so we can save, and we need to live below our means so we can give. As Mike was pointing out, Ephesians 5, 1 and 2 talks about our being imitators of God, therefore as dearly loved children, and live a life of love just as Christ loved us and gave himself. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. God is a giving God, and if we're going to imitate his love, then we must be a giving people. The worthy woman of Proverbs 31 has often been cited, but often with an agenda that's led people to overlook things that we're told about the worthy woman. I was trained in a congregation that virtually taught that it is a sin for a wife to work outside the home, especially full-time, and absolutely if she has minor children. And Proverbs 31 was often cited. But when you read Proverbs 31, what about that woman, that worthy woman? Was she an always stay-at-home mom? No, she went afar. She was out. I think she worked with Coldwell Banker. She would go and buy a field, all these things. That gives you some pause, I think. And yet we see at the same time that this woman is totally devoted to her family. She's not outside the home working to elevate her own ego. She's not outside the home working because she's discontent with what she could have living on what her husband can make. She's very devoted to her family. And in all of it, she's praised in Proverbs 31:20. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. She's a giver. It's telling to notice what else is praised about her, I think, in verses 13 through 21 of Proverbs 31. She worked hard. Some versions repeatedly use that very expression. She worked hard. She spent wisely. She invested her profits. She saved. And she planned ahead. And quite frankly, the reason, perhaps very likely, that some of us have often felt we couldn't give, I'm afraid, was because we had not been faithful stewards by working hard, spending wisely, planning ahead, and saving. That's why we couldn't give. Someone raised their hand. Well, Joyce, I think, was the first.
That has value in terms of dollars, but there are people who do that very work every single day and they get paid for it. But that mother stays home because her choices don't necessarily have to do with the money. They have to do with knowing that she is responsible for those children, is probably the best person to bring those children up. And there are a lot of women, and I know some personally, yes, who stay at home and you don't get paid Social Security for staying at home and taking care of your children and working in the garden and cleaning up the yard and the house. I probably told my son one day when he wanted to put up 3 shirts a day, if you're going to put on 3 shirts a day, you got to learn how to iron and wash them. But there's dollar value in the mother staying home and doing that.
Yes, remind me of that thought in just a moment. Yes, Hugh.
I read ahead, and I was afraid we might miss one of the things we got down here, and that is number 3. Be able, we live more below our means so we can give God the first slice of pie and be happy we can do it.
Yes. Troy talked about the things people do in order to live within their means. Do you remember some of the things he talked about? The first one was some steal and cheat. That's not an option for any of us that we would consider, I hope. Although in April, it's more likely that we'll do just that, if you know what I mean. We can decrease our expenses. We can lower our standard of living. That's another way. But what is the way that people, particularly Christians, usually think of first? If they realize they're not living within their means, their first thought is, I need to work more. I need to increase my income. Or we need to increase the family income. So the thought is the wife's going to work. One of the things that Larry Burkett said that really resonated with me back in the 80s is if you decrease your standard of living by $1, you get at least $1 benefit. But if you increase your family income by $1, do you get $1 benefit? No, why not? You got taxes. Yeah, if the wife goes to work, she's going to have a different sort of wardrobe more than likely. She's going to be buying lunches in some fashion every day. she's going to have transportation costs. She's going to be paying taxes. She's going to if she has minor children, very likely she's going to be paying child care. So many, many times, Joyce, the woman who stays at home can actually have a greater financial benefit for her family than the woman who works outside the home. And
doing for others that she doesn't have the time to do when she's working 8 or 10 hours a day or 8 hours a day and traveling 10, the other two, 1, 2, and 1.
yes, which is another way of saying that the family may feel like it has less money to give, but the wife and mother will be able to give of herself far more, which in many cases is what is more greatly needed than money. Yes, Angela, did you have something?
To our family, and you can't pay for time. You can't get it back. No matter how much money you have, you cannot get it back.
Yes, Bobby.
A similar thought to what I had earlier in Luke 16 when he talks about the parable of the steward. One of the points that Jesus makes is if you aren't faithful with the little things of this world, who will entrust you true riches? And if we can't take care of the pennies and nickels and dimes of this world, what are we doing with our spiritual blessings that have been given to us? I mean,
It's Luke 16, verse 10. And our time's about up, but I want to say this. This is a principle that Jesus was using differently than I'm about to use it. But it's a principle that applies more broadly. If you don't have much right now, do not think that you can wait to become a giver. Luke 16:10 says, "He who is faithful in a very little will be faithful also in much, but he who is unrighteous in a very little will be unrighteous with much." The way you're using the money you have right now is more than likely the way you will use your money no matter how much money you have in the future. Let us realize God is a giver. Let us realize that we need to live below our means because everything we have is God's. And so the question we need to be asking is, how will I spend God's money? We're not going to all reach the same conclusions about how we should spend God's money, but I want to tell you, and this is my closing thought. The problem is not Christians giving bad answers to that question. How should I spend God's money? The problem is that so few of us are thinking about that question at all. Let us keep God foremost in our minds. Let us set our affections on things that are above, not on things of this earth, as we manage the resources that God has entrusted to us. God bless you.